Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Our next guest should be no stranger to you. We were delighted to make her acquaintance about 2 years ago on this programme, despite the very serious and the very disturbing nature of the work that she does. She's been a counsellor and a therapist for over 25 years. She's Canadian. She's very well known and very highly thought of. We first met her, as I mentioned today, on social media after we learned that she was hearing stories of ritual satanic abuse from her patients. She was counselling people, of course, who had suffered trauma and who were victims of sex abuse, but I don't think she was prepared to hear the stories that she was being told at that time. That's how we first met her. Now, she's back in these parts. Well, she's in Dublin this evening, but she's back in the UK and in Ireland for a series of workshops that we will talk about with her and other things as well. Let's welcome back to the programme. She's in a hotel in Dublin, our friend Sandra Fecht. Sandra, welcome back. How are you?
Thank you, Richie. This is very generous of you, and I'm delighted to be here. A little tired. We flew all night, so I'm a little bit tired. And I'm here with my two friends, Fran Toes and Dave Staffen, who are also going to give you their parts of this huge picture.
Well, I'm delighted. And a big shout out to Fran and Dave. I'm connected to Dave on Skype, so a massive hello to them. By the way, I should have said to you, Sandra Tá Fáilte Rót, which is the Gaeilge, which is the Irish language, where you're very welcome now that you're in Dublin. And thanks for none of this talk about thanking me. Thank you for coming on after all of this. Well, look, the floor is over to you and Fran and Dave. Then, what are you in Ireland for? Why are you in the UK? What are you going to do?
Well, my overarching mission, self-imposed mission, is to free the victims of this kind of abuse. And it's probably 1 in 3 of us who have been touched by this. And also to help therapists, counselors, healers, nurses, doctors, lawyers, teachers, energy workers wake up to the fact that this is going on, and we're looking at this with closed eyes, the same way we looked at it back at sexual abuse back prior to the 1980s. And the other thing I want to get across is that we can do this and still keep a light heart most of the time. And every once in a while you have to sort of take your hat off and hold it over your heart as you hear some of these stories. But the rest of the time, you've got to be in kind of a good way. And some of the energetic methods that we'll be teaching, if we remember to use them, keep us there. It's a battle right now between creation and destruction. And there's so many destructive forces going on in our world, Richie. I also want to say that we're going to be in London next Friday. That's the 22nd at the London Euston Hotel. And we'll be there with Dr. Rainer Kurtz, whom I believe you know.
Yes.
And Wilfred Wong, Joe Lomax, Fran, myself, Dave, and retired doctor, retired psychiatrist, Anne Redolph, who is actually trained as a cult doctor to follow the rules and the bidding of the Satanists within the medical profession. So it's quite an exciting lineup and an exciting story, and we'll be teaching there how to use the methods and help people raise consciousness for themselves. There's lots and lots of hope. We are doing this workshop here at Miles Johnson's Bases Workshop, Ireland Awakes. I'm very grateful to be here. And so we have Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday we're doing a workshop here also. So I'm very happy to be spreading the word.
Brilliant. And can I just ask you, just before you go on, is this online now? Are there links to this online that we can mention?
It's on Eventbrite, and if you can't find it, some people have had difficulty finding it on Eventbrite. Apparently, our couple of other events are there, and so you have to scroll down a bit to find it. But it's on Eventbrite, and at the September 22nd, 23rd, 24th at the London Euston. So that's where you have to look. And you can come for the Friday night lecture or the weekend workshop.
Brilliant. And if people go to eventbrite.co.uk, if you enter Sandra's name, you are going to find links to where you can get tickets.
Yes, and Trauma to Triumph, I think, is the name of the London conference.
Trauma to Triumph. So just make a note of that, dear listener. If you're in London, I can't recommend highly enough. If this impacts you, and it has impacted you, you need to go and spend some time with Sandra and everybody else that she mentioned. Just before, because you're going to introduce Dave and Fran, and
yes,
we'll do that. And I'm going to leave you do that. I'm going to shut up, and you're going to have a conversation with Dave and Fran. But I just want to remind our listeners, it's important that we do this. I know you've been on before, but really, and not to over-dramatise this, nothing kind of prepared you for the stories you began to hear from your patients. That's how this came into your life, really, isn't it, Sandra?
It absolutely is. I just had learned of sexual abuse back in the 80s, and I realized that most of the damage was caused by what they didn't remember. I didn't realize in those days that your brain secretes cortisol to pack the most damaging parts of the memory away, and that the way your unconscious speaks to you is through symptoms. So if you have a resistant to change symptom, like a drug or like an addiction, gambling, drugs, alcohol, some perpetual difficult mood situation, you can't deal sexually, or you have social problems. There are 100 different ways that the symptoms talk to you. But in the end, the symptoms are your best friends. And so I had clients that had these really resistant symptoms, and I thought, I'll learn how to treat this. So I took some programs in NLP, energy work, hypnotherapy, shamanism, and other alternative healing methods. And I started to hear these stories. Now, I was trained in a medical model, and the answer from the medical model is to drug people.
Medicate, yeah.
And medicate them and put them into a psych ward. And I'm not a doctor, so I don't medicate, and I had to find other methods. And so I did, and people started to tell me these stories. And at first, with my background and training, I referred them back to their psychiatrist to be medicated, drugged, and put into a psych ward. But finally I realized, and everybody has to have their own convincers. And from my list of how to be convinced is it scientifically proven? Am I hearing it from a lot of people? Is it part of my own experience? Is it in the Bible? Is it in other cultures? You don't want to do the Semmelweis reflex, which is to condemn without, condemnation without investigation. Semmelweis being a doctor in the 1800s who was basically incarcerated as a madman for suggesting that doctors wash their hands after seeing patients with yellow fever and before delivering babies. And so I would ask your listeners to please keep a very open mind about what we're saying, and to keep balanced and to keep in a good way. We're not saying any of this to frighten anybody, but some of the stories are very horrific, and I'll be sharing those at the workshops. I'm a little uneasy sharing them just on the air, but basically it's every kind of torture you can imagine. And at least 1 million children a year go missing according to the stats, and that's without Africa and Asia and most of Europe reporting in. And half of those children are found, but half of them are never seen again. Never. And I feel so sad for parents who have been through this. But we as a community need to wake up. We can't do what Dr. Jennifer Freyd calls betrayal blindness, where it's more convenient for us to, because of our professional status or that we might be thought of as being fools, or we're afraid to look at it. We cannot turn a blind eye to this. We have to advocate for the clients and to save the children and recognize this is going on and do something about it.
You made a really good point, Sandra. It's hugely important that we labour the point you made about the medical fraternity. First of all, not believing these men and women. They don't believe them. This is a huge problem. Immediately upon being told stories like this, they are not believed, and as you said, they are medicated, and sometimes they are institutionalized, and this is what we have. I've spoken to probably half a dozen victims over the years who've told horrific stories, and what kept coming back to me was apart from the similarity of the stories, was that they were never believed. I was never believed. I was never believed. I was never believed. And it's hugely important, I suppose, that people like you are there, or that people like you break out of the mainstream to say, well, look, I'm hearing these stories, I believe them to be true, I've investigated them, and I've treated people. And if you want to introduce Dave and Fran, and if they want to talk, we are past the watershed here. I suppose we still have to be careful in terms of you never know who's listening, and you never know how people might be affected. But if they want to talk about their own experiences of this, how they came to be where they are now, you know, in Dublin, preparing to talk to people about this subject, it's really over to you, Sandra.
Okay, and one thing I would like to say before I introduce Fran is that we are in Ireland today, as I said, and we're going to London next weekend. And there have to be people that have gone through this that are afraid to speak up. I need to hear from you, especially need to hear from you if you've had any reptilian experience. And my email is Sandra, Sandra, Fecht, F as in Frank, E, C, H, T as in Tom, at Rogers, ROGERS.com. And with that, I'm going to introduce Fran. And Fran and Dave, I will say, are two of the hardest working clients I have ever had in my years and years of practice. If they're given a homework assignment or something to do, they're on it. They really were motivated to get better. They persevered, and the results have just been amazing. I mean, many, many people comment on the physical change in Fran and how she has become younger. She has a keen intelligence and is able to put together and connect ideas. The particular things that Fran and I have been working on and that Fran has documented are the mechanisms of our energy field by Satanism, so that these things limit us. And we have been so turned away from looking at our frequency and energetic parts. And because we don't know it, they're able to do so many things. And I'll point it over to Fran to elucidate.
Brilliant. Hey, Fran, welcome to the program. Thanks for coming on, by the way.
Thank you very much, Richie. It's really nice to meet you in this way.
It is, and again, we're talking about very disturbing things, and you know, I'm well aware of that. But it is nice to meet you nonetheless, and I'm glad you're in Dublin, Fran. I'm glad you're there with Dave and Sandra, and I think people are going to be glad to hear what you're saying. And I want to just very quickly reiterate, Sandra Fecht, Fecht at rogers.com. If you're in Ireland or in London and you've experience with this and you need to talk to somebody, Sandra Fecht at rogers.com, particularly, as Sandra said, if there's been any reptilian angle to this. Fran, tell us about yourself then. And you're in a place where you've got time and there isn't anything that you can't say. So how did you, what happened to you, I suppose?
Okay, Richie. So when I was in grade 7, I was starting to have what I didn't know were memories, but they were of very strange and horrific events that in which I would be semi-conscious or unconscious or in great pain, being tortured, perverted sex, and so on, like very life-threatening situations. And so I had those, what I didn't know were memories, and they just stayed with me my entire life. And I thought, you know, I can't forget this. They never went out of my memory. So I had been doing a lot of social type of work, becoming aware of a lot of the very strange things that go on in the world, like chemtrails and Fukushima and what David Icke talks about, and genetically modified organisms. So I was developing a consciousness of things that were going on, and someone said I should meet Sandra, and we found that we had a real simpatico in the way we looked at things alternatively. And so I decided to explore these very strange things with her. And it turns out I was bringing her conscious memories of events that had occurred. Now, I would like to say to the listeners that, as Sandra has said, and as you have said, there is a very horrific nature to these things. Darkness really prevails upon us in a heavy-handed way, and they don't respect free will. They're extremely manipulative, and they will use pain and torture and drugs and so on to lower our level of consciousness. But I think a breakthrough that I want to reassure the listeners about came in our therapy sessions when Sandra suggested that we kind of detach from the physical level of things, certainly know what went on, that's important, but begin to look at it in the energetic sense, in the sense that we are all energy bodies far more than we are physical bodies, and look at the events, what was going on at the energetic level, which turns out to be their end game. They want pieces of our soul, they want our energy, they want to limit our consciousness, and they want to put things into our energy field that really make us run poorly. And it's remarkable when you see these things that we call satanic mechanisms. And then through, there was a synergy that happened in timing, me meeting Sandra, and then meeting Dave Staffen, who you will hear from shortly, a real synergy and healing. And thanks to Sandra's really profound level of connection with the universal field of consciousness, the light side, we were given direction about how to heal these energetic mechanisms energetically. And it's really exciting to be able to share this type of information. It's beautiful because the light side is there to support us, but they respect free will so much we have to ask them. They're standing by in droves.
What happened when your dreadful experiences happened to you? I'm guessing that you were a young girl, you were pre-pubescent young girl, would that be right?
Oh, from infancy onward, and probably in the womb as well. Because
I've come to understand from, I'm not a therapist, I'm a lay person, and I was very, very skeptical many years ago about these claims. I'm very honest, in saying that I used to be very skeptical. But what I've come to understand is the entities working through the people who do, and that's not to excuse the people who commit these atrocities against children, they're after the energy of prepubescent children, and they get that through trauma, is what I've come to understand. And exposing the children to the most unimaginable atrocities. That's what we're talking about here. Am I right? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, we're all nodding here. You're absolutely correct. Trauma is one of the ways that they remove energy from the energy field, but trauma also affects the physical body in specific ways that they want to affect as well. So it shuts down certain parts of the body. All parts of the body have functions according to our soul purpose, and they have esoteric meanings. So if, for example, trauma shuts down the corpus callosum, the thing that connects the two hemispheres of the brain, we really need the connection of the two hemispheres in order to connect with God. So they can do this at virtually every level of your energy field, every level of your physical body, and they are masters of it. And we've compiled quite a list of things that they can do that numbers into the hundreds.
Into the hundreds. Now, I'm going to get this out of the way. Sandra will probably be waiting. She's probably been waiting for me to say this. I believe you. I really do believe you. And I used to be incredibly cynical. You know that skeptics, some of them kind, but some of them not kind, but skeptics will say, Fran, how can you be 100% sure that all of the memories or all of the experiences are real? I know I absolutely believe you, but in the interest of, addressing the skeptic, I'm sure you've been asked that question 1,000 times. I know that what happens is real. Have you not?
No.
Well, I'm glad you haven't been asked that question. But people who do listen, because obviously we go out on commercial radio and we're mainstream as much as independent, and people say, these are very, very interesting people. They're very nice people. They're very sincere people, Richie. How can they be sure that they had the experiences? What do you think?
Okay. First of all, I began to have these memories spontaneously on my own. And actually, during the course of therapy, they all came on their own, or let's say a great percentage of them. So before I ever met Sandra, I had them. Next, the nature of the experiences and the traumas is so severe that one cannot keep it in your conscious memory. You simply cannot deal with it.
Yes.
And so it ends up being in the subconscious, but it keeps the subconscious is the driver of your bus. And so your life will show the symptoms of something having gone terribly wrong. And my life is certainly an example of that. As a young person, I showed a great deal of promise. I had an extremely good intellect. I got top marks at school, athlete of the year. Pardon me?
Art and science.
Oh, yes, I was a good artist and really good at science. And yet at one point I just began to collapse, and I ended up spending decades in a depression so dark that I almost didn't make it out. It's like every second was an eternity of torment. And it was very hard to continue through that. I used to walk into the woods far enough that no one would hear me and scream at the top of my lungs and have no idea why I was doing that. I couldn't make a decision. I couldn't find a direction or focus in my life. The various things show up as symptoms in our lives. And so I also send...
This is textbook, by the way. What you're describing is textbook trauma, symptoms of trauma. It's textbook. I've gone through this myself. I wasn't sexually abused. I was very lucky I wasn't sexually abused, but I was violently, physically abused badly for many, many years. And everything you said there brings back It brings it all back to me, the problems, the acting out, the depression. There's no doubt about it. And for me, Fran, and I want to bring Dave in as well then, and Sandra, they can jump in anytime they want. For me, the things that happen to you, I've heard stories almost word for word similar to what happened to you from people from all over the world that predate the internet, that predate Facebook, that predate social media. Your experiences were real. They definitely happened to you. And what you described there in your later adolescence, in your 20s and 30s, is textbook of severe trauma. There's no doubt about that. I'm not being rude now, but I'm mindful of time, so I want to bring Dave in. Stay where you are as well, Fran, and jump in anytime you want. Dave, welcome to the programme. Thanks for sorting out the technicalities, Dave.
That's not my strong suit.
But you're a good man to have around in a crisis. You sorted it out. So here we are. Well, if you want to introduce yourself to the audience, Dave, and talk about, your own experiences like Fran and how you came to be where you are today.
Okay, well, I'm pleased to be here, and I'm enjoying Ireland and looking forward to going to England next week. First of all, I'd like to say, for the listeners, you won't realize you've been a victim of the things Fran and I will be talking about. But if you have anger that you don't know where it comes from, so much so that you can barely control it, that's a symptom of post-traumatic stress. My adult life, I couldn't fit in socially. I was unable to have a real friend my whole life from childhood up. I was afraid of social situations. I was afraid of confrontations. I considered myself a coward. And I was in 2007 diagnosed with a form of bipolar illness, which with me manifested as mania that I would exhibit at work. And I had this mania for 30 year time period. And upon working with Sandra and uncovering my truth of what had happened to me, those symptoms simply dissipated and were no more. And recently I had a psychiatric assessment done, and I was deemed free and clear of any mental illness. So what I'm saying is recalling what happened to me through recovering memories healed my mental illness. The medical establishment doesn't want to hear that or listen to that. So I'm just saying, if you suffer from any of the things I've mentioned, lacks of self-love, self-esteem, self-confidence, dysfunction in all relationships, these are symptoms of post-traumatic stress. So you don't have to have suffered from Satanism to get great benefit from Sandra's healing methods. Sandra's healing methods have allowed me to transform myself from who I thought I was into what I am today. Completely transformed. I'm not angry. I like to talk to people about forgiveness and about the love I've experienced since forgiving, because I had hundreds of perpetrators in my lifetime. I was born into a family whose mother and father were both adhered to the methods, practices, and traditions of Satanism. And it begins very early if you're born into a family like that. I think Fran mentioned like childhood stuff in the womb. But my memories really started at 2 years old when I would go to the basement of the Anglican church in my hometown and was subjected to these events which were designed to measure the courage, will, compassion, loyalty of their offsprings, because the cult people want to know the attributes of their children. And women were present at these events, and they were a gay old time as they laughed at the little boys fighting each other to see who had courage to deal with animals like rats and snakes and just be challenged in various different ways. And that went on for a period of time until sometime in my third year, the events completely changed. The men often wore robes and were chanting, and now women were no longer present, and events were designed to initiate me into the cult of my mom and dad. And to be initiated into the cult, to become one of them, that was the term that was always used, to become one of them, I had to kill a human being by stabbing him in the heart with a knife, which occurred time and time again. And somehow...
Dave, can I stop you there?
Yeah.
You were forced as a very young boy to stab somebody.
Yes. Well, some of my first memories, I was being trained by one of my relatives, now deceased, how to kill small animals with a knife. And so, yeah, they want you to lose your compassion so that you can become one of them. Because they live in the energies of hatred. So if you have compassion, you can't live in the energies of hatred. Did I
mishear you there? I thought that you said that you were induced to or compelled to stab a person.
Well, yeah, but that I wouldn't do it.
You didn't do it.
The invisibles above and all the spiritual beings must have helped me, because I would throw the knife down and yell no, I would immediately start running, because my dad and the other men would chase me, and when they caught me, they would beat me, sodomize me, and mind control program me. And this happened every time I said no, which went on for a couple years, until such time the cult leader declared we must destroy him. If we don't destroy him, someday surely he will destroy us. And so my destruction was absolute, complete, and total. I was beat hundreds of times by older, bigger boys to unconsciousness, many times per evening, had water thrown on me, beat to unconsciousness again, had kids come up to me when I was walking on the street, older kids I had never seen before, and just start beating me up. And so, because they wanted revenge against the kid who wouldn't become one of them. And they wanted revenge against the boy who yelled at them, I am better than you. I don't hurt people who can't fight back, which I did a few times in my 4th and 5th years.
And children never tell, Dave. What we've learned over the years, even my experiences, I know some people who were sexually abused by members of the clergy in Ireland. We know that children just don't tell. They implicitly think they're never going to be believed. They go into themselves and they don't tell. They don't tell a teacher. They don't tell a friend's mother. They don't tell anybody. They just keep this with them until they begin to suppress it. That's what happens, isn't it?
Well, that can happen. But what happened to me, if you ever Google, like Sandra mentioned, Dr. Jennifer Fried at the University of Oregon, she's made her life's work the study of betrayal trauma, it's called. And that is such that if a caretaker sexually abuses or hurts the child will automatically forget that. It will be deleted from their conscious mind, although it's stored in the subconscious. Because if the child realizes that the people that are supposed to love them hate them and are hurting them, they would lose their will to live and could just die. And there's been... Dr. Fried has studies that show this happened in World War II in England, when the children were moved to the north of England when the bombing was occurring in London and the south of England. And a lot of these babies, though they were cared for, just started dying because they weren't getting the loving nourishment from their caretakers.
Yeah, that's right.
So the revenge perpetrated against me lasted for 50 years. I was 53 years old and didn't have a clue that any of this had ever happened to me. And I finally figured out that the anger that was ready to erupt at any moment was the dysfunction, was the cause of the problems in my marriage. So I went to see Sandra and was very dedicated and devoted to find out what the cause of that anger and remove it. And of course, the healing went in a direction I never dreamed possible. And so thus began the process of removing all these negative energies, the negative effects from the post-traumatic stress incidents of Satanism from my energy field.
I really want to thank both you. We're not going anywhere, by the way. We've got another 10, maybe even just about 15 minutes left. We're not going anywhere just yet. But I want to thank you and Fran for sharing that. I really do. I mean that sincerely. I know you're in a good place, but it still can't be easy to talk about these things, particularly with strangers, even though that's what you're going to be effectively doing in Dublin and in London, and it's important. Can you and Fran can come back in as well, and Sandra, you jump in anytime you want. These groups of people, which I believe to be operating in cities in England and in Ireland and elsewhere, how did they get away with it? Does it come down to our incredulity? You know, as people, we're preconditioned not to believe it. Dave is a lovely fella. I work with Dave. I work with Fran. They're lovely. They're harmless. But sure, they're fantasists. They have these fantasies. Is that how these predators operate in society? Because we're preconditioned to think this is crazy. Fran, come back in on that. What do you think?
Well, I think that the main thing, one of the main things, is to decrease our level of consciousness. We are amazing, energetic beings of infinite potential, and these things they use, the tortures, the traumas, etc., they lower our level of consciousness, and we cannot access who we really are. We can't access the memories. So that's one aspect of it.
If I can jump in there, Richie, there are other ways that this happens. Back in the 1770s in Brussels, a group of bankers got together and decided how they would take over the world. And it's been well documented in a book by William Carr called Pawns in the Game. And what they did was break up families, promote addictions, drugs and alcohol, foment wars, and they said they would foment, that group of obviously generations later said that they would foment 3 wars in the 20th century. One was against Russian Tsarism, one was against the political Zionists and Nazis, and the final one would be against the political Zionists and the Muslims. And they're a little bit off target in their timing, but they're certainly doing it. And when you create a war, think of the amount of trauma that a war produces. And when that happens, if that veteran goes home, has children, the effects of the PTSD of that war are shown up to 10 generations later. So there is hardly a European walking around out there who has not had some aspect of trauma. And when you're dealing with trauma, you don't think properly.
No.
I think the other thing is that many people, there's like this dark underbelly to society. And we have judges, lawyers, teachers, ministers, as you well know, priests, just you name it, they're from all walks of life, who are part of this system. And I'm thinking of Andrea Sadegh, who has a website called Trauma-Based Mind Control. And she lost her son when she tried to go to court and say, hey, my son's coming, my 2-year-old is coming back home after weekends with his father, and reporting, these horrific events that are things that young adults should hardly know about, let alone a 2-year-old child or a 3-year-old child. And the judge awarded custody to the father, saying that Andrea was mentally ill. And we need judges, honest lawyers, who are going to wake up to this. And I think part of the reason we don't see it is because many people are involved in covering this up. And it goes to the highest levels of society, just as the Jimmy Savile sex scandal did.
And a number of our listeners have mentioned Savile on Twitter, and Hampstead Heath has come up on Twitter. This is one that I always get criticised for, even though I never said it didn't happen. Mm-hmm. I just pointed out that those who wish to, keep this secret, they will throw things into the public domain sometimes that didn't happen in order to muddy it. But I never said Hampstead didn't happen. But, a lot of what was claimed to have happened in Hampstead makes sense when you hear Dave and Fran and other survivors. It does. And then when you explain, how this can function in society, how it can operate in society untouched, sometimes on your doorstep, like friends of ours and listeners have been tweeting, it's extraordinary. What happened to Dave and Fran happened to people in their primary schools, happened to people in their own homes, happened in their churches. How could it go on? And that's what the skeptic keeps coming back with it couldn't have gone on. It couldn't be going on, Richie. Why do you believe it, Richie? I'm like, well, I believe it because independent men and women have told me for many years from different parts of the world. And, reading David, listening to Sandra Fecht, listening to other people, Jay Parker, speaking to the people in Australia, I know it's happened. I know it's going on. And I know the establishment is doing everything it can to prevent it from coming out, because it might be the end of things, Sandra. I mean, I wonder what you, Dave and Fran, think. If this comes to public attention and the public accept it, it might be game over for those who perpetrate this stuff. What do you think?
Well, I sure hope that happens soon. But one thing I'd like to mention is that, it's regularly reported that there's $1 billion child pornography industry out there. Pedophilia is the cornerstone of Satanism. So if there's $1 billion child pornography industry out there, that means there's millions upon millions of pedophiles. Pedophilia is the cornerstone of Satanism. Where do all those pedophiles live? Where are they? They're everywhere. They're interspersed throughout our society on the upper levels and on the lower levels. They're the neighbor next door, they're the guy that waves hi to you every day, and they're the guy that gives you a loaf of bread at the store sometimes. And they're right amongst us. And so that's something to consider when people say it's not happening. The problem the good people have in accepting this is because they can't comprehend that there are other people who have such darkness in their heart that they would do these horrific things to children. And that was a big hurdle for me to get over, to imagine that those who were supposed to love me actually did these things to me. And because who would do that? Well, there's quite a few people who do that, unfortunately.
One of the big red flags for me, Fran, was learning that most of the time, sadly, when a woman realises that her son or daughter is being abused by her husband or partner, and there's physical evidence to support this, and she reports it to the authorities, in many cases, in fact in most cases, the innocent mother trying to protect her child ends up losing contact with her own child. Now, I know this to be true. It happens all the time. That was a huge red flag for me, that there is something very, 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 very horrible and awful going on, and that it is being covered up. Imagine a situation where a mum realises, baby Keith or baby Mary is being abused by husband or partner, and she ends up losing the child. It's extraordinary. Well,
it's criminally insane to deny the mother the right to the child when she is only trying to protect the child. And it's Sandra speaking here. Fran kind of handed it over to me. So yeah, there's that. And you asked what it would be like earlier, if I can back up a few steps here, Richie, if, all of this came tumbling down. I would really hope that we would find our North Star, our values again, because part of the agenda of this group from the 1770s in Brussels was to destroy morality. And even, they control the media, they control the music industry, they control everything. And it's hard for people to wrap their head around that. And everybody needs a convincer, something that says, you know what, the penny dropped for me. I realize this. I'm awake to it now, and I see it everywhere. And each one of us have to find that convincer and go through that and start making a revolution within ourselves to bring ourselves online with morality. And I'm not talking about being prudish or something. I'm talking about being decent, to bring ourselves online with that and to engage the compassion in us again. We're in a society where these folks did not want to be discovered, so that by the time we all woke up and said, oh my gosh, what's happening, it would be too late. And that is in their own rules. I think of the elderly veteran in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, who was giving out plates of food to the poor. And it's illegal to do that in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Madness.
The police approached him, arms outstretched, guns pointed at him, and said, drop the plate. But concurrent with this, they're giving out free books in Dade County, Florida, coloring books that describe all this. It's a free Satanic coloring book, yours for the asking. Google it. Where the Satanic kids are all like cool and thin and pretty, and the Christian kids are all, ugly and stupid and so on. And this is happening, and it's creeping in. And one of the things that they decided to do was replace God with freedom, and then take away the freedom and bring in Lucifer. And you can see it. I mean, if you looked at the CERN opening ceremonies, that was about as overtly satanic as things get, but we are being so accustomed to it now. The water temperature has gone up so gently that we don't even realize we're at the boiling point.
Do you know, we're just about out of time. That's been about the quickest 45 minutes we've ever done on the program. It's just absolutely flown by. You're in Dublin, and you guys are in London from Friday the 22nd, which is a week this Friday. Sandra, please give us the details again of the venues. And it's Eventbrite, by the way, .co.uk for people who want to book to go and see Sandra, Dave, Fran, and many others in London. Give us those details again, Sandra.
We're at the London Euston Premier Inn. And as you have said, it's on Eventbrite. And September 22nd is a Friday, and there's very great speakers that evening. And then the 23rd and 24th, there are workshops in how to recognize and deal with it if you happen to be a victim, or treat it if you happen to be a healer. And it's a fun, believe it or not, we have a lot of laughs. There's a lot of deep work going on, but it's a lot of laughs. And I'm hoping that we can get more and more therapists to come in and start seeing this. Just as there was a revolution in recognizing sexual abuse, I'm looking for the revolution in dealing with this stuff. And this weekend, we are in Dublin at the Talbot Inn in Still, Oregon, and at the Basis Conference, Ireland Awakes. And I have a powerful speech, Richie. I hope you listen in.
Yeah, sounds good. I look forward to seeing the captures on YouTube. I really do. Folks, go to Eventbrite for London, Talbot Inn in Dublin. Turn up on the day, and I'm sure you can pay on the day as well. Huge thanks to you, Fran, and you, Dave, for sharing your experiences with us and with everybody else. I really enjoyed not listening to those experiences, of course, but I enjoyed meeting you. And again, Sandra, huge thanks and respect to you. Folks, Sandra's email address is sandrafecht, that's F-E-C-H-T, at Rogers, ROGERS.com. Contact her, contact her anyway. But if you've got experiences with that are reptilian in nature, she really wants to hear from you. Guys, it was an honour. Continued success to you. Have a great series of workshops in Dublin. It's one of the greatest places you can be in the world, and we look forward to seeing you in London. Thanks so much.
And keep up the great work, Richie. Thank you.
Thank you, Richie.
Thanks, guys. Look after yourselves. Godspeed. Terrific. Sandra Fecht there, Dave Staffen, and we also heard from Fran. They're in Dublin. Go and see them if you can. It's very, very serious and important what they're doing.